As a parent, the one thing you have to understand is you can't necessarily change your child. I think a lot of parents, they see their child is autistic, they see these things as being different, and they want to somehow change their child and make them like them. Like they want to kind of work those issues and make them go away. And that's not going to happen. If your child has this, it's not going to disappear. You can teach them to coordinate the real world with these issues. And a lot of times they can run circles around that world if they do it properly, but they're always going to be different from everybody else. So you can't train it out of them, which I think is what a lot of parents, they try to do that early on. Like, we can fix this, we can make them better. And it's not a thing that can be fixed or made better. I don't even see it as a negative. I wouldn't be doing what I do today without it. Like I mentioned, we call it a superpower. Like, it's, to me, it's a gift.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gilda Evans, bringing you the Autism Resource Podcast. This podcast and the ARP website are your one-stop knowledge and resource base for autism and much more. I'm honored to have J.D. Barker join me as my guest today. J.D. is an international best-selling American author whose work has been broadly described as suspense thrillers, often incorporating elements of horror, crime, mystery, science fiction, and the supernatural. He was diagnosed with autism at the age of 22 and considers it one of the main reasons he is so successful. Welcome, JD, and thanks so much for taking the time to join me today and discuss the work that you do.
Thanks for having me. I'm gonna have my wife introduce me like that every time I come into a room.
Well, happy to send you the paragraph and you can pass it along. So, to start with, growing up, you have mentioned feeling different but not knowing why. Can you share what that experience was like for you as a child and how that impacted the way you viewed yourself and the world around you?
Sure. Things are very different today. So I was born in the 70s, 71. Back then, they didn't look for neurodivergence. They didn't look for any of these things. You were basically the strange kid that kind of was pushed off into a corner somewhere, shunned by kids and adults alike. There was nothing like what we have going on today. I didn't know what was going on with me, what was different. I grew up without a TV in the house. So we were hitting the library at a very early age, and I was reading by the time I was 3. By the time I got into kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews and moved on to Charles Dickens. I thought that was normal. And when I got into kindergarten, realized the other kids couldn't quite do that yet. It just made me that much stranger from everybody else. And I retreated very heavily into books because whenever I felt like the real world wasn't working out for me, I could open up the cover of a good title and kind of disappear inside of it, which I have pretty much done my entire life. But I graduated high school. I went off into college. I had no idea. I knew the term autism. I knew it was out there. But aside from seeing the movie Rain Man, I really didn't understand what it was. And I had no clue that it actually even pertained to me. So I finished up college. I got a degree in finance, another one in business, a degree in IT. I ended up working in the corporate world as a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm, which is essentially like being internal affairs at a police station. Nobody really wants you there, but somebody has to do the job. You have to monitor everything that's passing through the firm, make sure nobody breaks any rules or regulations, which I was fantastic at. I wrote computer software to deal with a lot of like SEC regulations and transactional regulations. I was able to get computers to do a lot of that work at a time when people weren't really doing that yet. But where I ran into a snag is when I actually found a problem. I had to step out of my office and I had to actually talk to real people. And social skills was always a problem for me. I was very much a loner my entire life. So when I had to do that, it was a difficult thing. My boss basically recognized the fact that I was very good at my job, but thought that I was just lacking in the people skills side. He thought I had anger issues because nobody really knew how to pinpoint this, how to identify it. So he sent me to anger management classes. And I was in an introductory meeting with a therapist. We talked for maybe 20 minutes and she stopped and she said, "Have you ever been tested for autism?" And like I said, I really had no idea what that really was. And she started rattling these things off. She said, "Well, the entire time we've been talking, you haven't made eye contact with me. I've noticed you staring at the same spot, like kind of next to my chair. I've noticed that your thumb and forefinger, you rub those together whenever you're thinking." And she started going through this laundry list of things that I was doing. And then ultimately she had me tested. We landed on a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. And then once I had had that as a diagnosis, it basically became another problem that I could solve, which I was very good at solving problems. You put a puzzle in front of me, I will find the solution to it. So I researched everything I could. I read a lot of books, watched a lot of documentaries, and just started tackling these issues. And I worked with this woman for a very long time. She primarily worked with children. I think I might have been the only adult she was actually working with. But we created a list of everything that at the time I felt was a problem, like the social skills and things like. But we also made a list of the things that I could do that nobody else could do. I was very good at writing computer code. I was very good with the music. I was very good at the written word. So all these things kind of went into the pros column, and I doubled down on a lot of them. In today's world, my wife calls them my superpowers. I'm working on 8 different books right now. If you look at my desk, there's literally not a shred of paper on there. It's all on my head. I'm able to keep all those storylines straight. These are all things that I can do that somebody who's atypical that basically can't. So over the years, I've kind of worked on that. I've learned to get through social situations. I've learned to make eye contact with people when I'm having a conversation. The funny thing is, it's not real. And my wife knows that if I actually make eye contact with her in a conversation, she knows I'm not paying attention to her. For me to actually pay attention in a conversation, I need to be looking off somewhere else. If I make eye contact with somebody, I'm literally telling myself, keep eye contact, keep eye contact, keep eye contact, like the whole time that I'm talking. And I have no clue what we're actually talking about, which is just kind of a funny thing. But like, she's learned to recognize that. But I'm 30 years now after that diagnosis. 30 years have passed. I've weeded out some of these things. Other things have stuck with me. But I speak out about it quite a bit because I'm fairly successful in today's world in my career. And I remember what it was like when I was a child. And I've met plenty of parents of autistic children. They may have an 18-month-old that's banging its head against the wall and just screaming every time it's touched. And I remember what that was like. So I speak to a lot of parents and try to give them a little bit of hope. Like, there is a light at the end of that tunnel if you stick with it. So that's one of the reasons I do shows like this.
So that is a wonderful introduction to what you've been through, what you went through as a child and growing up, and what you faced when you started actually entering the workplace. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to that. And many of our listeners were diagnosed as adults, interestingly enough, because, as you say, when you were growing up, it just, you were the odd kid, the strange kid, the kid that behaved differently, and nobody really knew why or understood why. But what I would like to know now are, what were some of the key obstacles you faced before you understood your autism as your superpower, as you say? What was that process like as you understood that it was actually a benefit, a superpower, something that made you capable of doing all of these wonderful things? How did you come to be comfortable with that? And how did recognizing your unique strengths change the way that you approached life in general and your career?
Well, one of the things that the particular therapist pointed out very early on, she explained mimicking to me, which I didn't realize I was actually doing. And for people that are listening to this show right now, essentially, if I'm in a social situation, I mimic what I see other people doing around me. So if somebody cracks a joke, I will laugh at that joke, but I'm usually a millisecond behind everybody else. And I'm laughing because the other people are laughing, not necessarily because I thought it was funny. I don't know how to react in those situations. So I just mimic what I see others doing. Where that's translated into the real world for me, it's something I still have to do. It's not something that goes away or you can train out of yourself. But I learned that I was able to do it with the written word as well. So when somebody put a piece of text in front of me written by another person, I could pick up on that author's writing patterns, their vocabulary, their cadence, and basically mimic their writing style, which is partly how I broke into being an author. I worked on a lot of memoirs. I worked on a lot of completion projects, helping other people ghostwrite novels where I had to write in somebody else's voice. And I was able to pick that up and do it, simply because of the skill set. So just it translates over. But it's funny because in today's world, like if I go to, like I was at a party with my wife at our neighbor's house about 2 weeks ago, those are terrifying for me because like I was basically standing in groups of people and they're all friends, people that I know, but I never know what's happening next. I don't know what's going to come on in that conversation. I don't know who I'm going to speak to next. And my brain has a habit of listening to the conversation and kind of playing the whole thing out in my head before it actually happens. So somebody will say one sentence, I'll immediately know what the response is going to be to that. I know the response to that, the response to that. I will play out that whole conversation and be done with it before the second person's utters a word, which means that I get bored because now I'm listening to a conversation I feel like I already had and I want to get up and I want to walk away. I try to force myself not to do that as much as I want to. Those types of situations to me are always frightening. They always take a lot of energy. I feel like I have to dial myself up to like 11 or 12 while I'm doing it. And then when I get out of it, I crash. Like I have to take some time alone. I have to recharge the batteries and try to recover from it. Where I find that other things are different though, like in the author world, like if I have to go and talk to a group of people, like I was recently in Budapest, I had about 1,000 people that came to a book signing that I did where I had to get up in front of them. I had to give a speech, I had to sign a bunch of books for about 3 hours and just talk to a whole bunch of strangers. When I do that, it doesn't bother me at all. And it's essentially because I'm getting up on stage and I'm rattling off a speech that I've given a million times before, that I've fine tuned, basically putting on the persona of an author. I'm getting up and playing the part of an author. Even when I talk to the individual people, when I sign their books, the comments that I get, you're my favorite author. This is my favorite book. I'm glad you came. All these things are things that I've heard over and over again. So I've got canned responses to them. So even though I'm dealing with a lot more people from a numbers standpoint, it's easier to do that than it is to be in a one-on-one situation or a one-on-two situation. Even back like when I was dating my wife, at the time when I dated somebody early on in a relationship, I could pretend to be a boyfriend. I could keep up that persona for a date, for 2 dates. But when you're with somebody 24/7, you can't do that. Eventually that mask has to come off. So my wife and I, we had a conversation very early on where I had to explain the diagnosis that I had, what it means, and she had to make a decision. Did she want to be in a relationship with somebody like me? And ultimately we did decide to move forward. We've been married for a little over 10 years now, but we at the time immediately got a therapist that specializes in this kind of thing, that kind of worked as a mediator to bridge that gap, because everything we do is different from a communication standpoint. Like I approach every situation extremely logical in my mind anyway. I've got a particular solution in mind and she'll come at it from her standpoint, and usually we're completely wide apart on every single decision. But we've learned over time to talk those things out and to try to put some value behind each other's perspective on it and find some kind of solution that's in the middle. And in past relationships, I didn't do any of that. It was basically my way or the highway, which obviously doesn't work for very long. So these are all things that just over time I've learned to work with.
Now, as you mentioned before, you often counsel parents of children with autism. What advice do you give them when they're first navigating a diagnosis, and how can they best support their children during those early years?
A lot of it is things that I learned working with therapists. Essentially, I tried to find the one thing that their child gravitate towards. And a lot of times it could be playing with a certain toy, it could be watching a certain TV show, it could be music, it could be this, it could be that. But once you figure out what that one thing is, it kind of opens a door where I can speak to that kid, and then also the parents can speak to that kid, because now all of a sudden the child's got something they can relate and they can talk about. When an autistic person has a particular thing that they're excited about, they will talk about it all day long. And you'll find that if you do that, if you encourage that, you can easily jump over to talking about something else, to working on something else. Like I purposely put myself in difficult situations. Like I hated being around other people in the past, but because of that, I put myself in a position where I have to do it on a daily basis. I do a lot of shows like this, which were very uncomfortable for me years ago, but now I can do very easily. And it's because I forced myself to do it over and over again. And I find that the more often I do those uncomfortable things, the easier they become. And I could just as easily retreat. Like in a perfect world, I would sit at my desk all by myself and hammer out books and not have to talk to anybody 24/7. And I could easily fall back into that routine if I let myself do it. And I purposely make sure that that never happens.
It's really nice that you're able to share all of this, just like you found a way to compromise with your wife and get along with your wife, and you learn from your past experiences how to build a relationship and how to get along in a relationship. And it's just so wonderful that you're sharing this with other parents and other people and giving them this insight, because it is so helpful to have the insight from someone with a perspective like yours, someone who has the lived experience, someone who's gone through it, someone who's made mistakes and learned from them and found ways to navigate and to be a part of relationships and just life in general. I just think it's wonderful. Now, can you talk a little bit about how your superpower has shaped your creative process and enabled you to accomplish the actually very impressive things that you've achieved? How does it influence your work and your interaction with others?
Well, I think for me and for a lot of people like me, patterns are extremely important. Repetition is extremely important. I've learned to recognize patterns in pretty much everything in life. I mentioned I've been reading from a very early age. All those books that I read, I saw the structure in my head. Characters are introduced here, a twist needs to happen here, the climax or the finale needs to start here. I've seen that over and over again to the point where it's drilled in my head, and it's a formula, it's a framework. So when I write a book, I know when I need to make those particular changes, when I need to trigger those certain things. And it's funny because I've never had any formal training at it, but you could take any one of my books and drop them into a 3-act structure and everything fits. And it's just because that structure has been drilled into my head over and over again. So that's definitely helped me get through all this. A lot of it is very similar to writing computer code. Like when you write a piece of software, the first sentence that you write, that first line of code, you have to understand how it's going to impact the last line of code, which dictates how everything in between has to go. And writing a book to me is no different. Writing a piece of music is the same.
Very, very interesting. Getting back to parenting a child with autism, what message would you like to share with parents who may feel overwhelmed or uncertain about how to raise their child with autism? Let's say they've gotten past that point where they've gotten the diagnosis and now they're trying to figure out, all right, what do I do now? What should they focus on to help their child thrive?
Well, it's very different in today's world. So I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and she actually got a diagnosis about a year ago. And that triggered a lot of things at her school. She's got a support team that's in place. She's got teachers that are watching for certain things. She's getting special training and other things. She doesn't know she's autistic. And, and she doesn't know that she's different. And I credit a lot of that to the people that are around her and the fact that this was caught early on and they're helping her work through it at an age where she's developing so quickly rather than trying to catch it in the rear view, which is when you get diagnosed as an adult, it's a lot harder to unravel a lot of these different things. I think as a parent, the one thing you have to understand is you can't necessarily change your child. I think a lot of parents, they see their child is autistic, they see these things as being different, and they want to somehow change their child and make them, like they want to kind of work those issues and make them go away. And that's not going to happen. If your child has this, it's not going to disappear. You can teach them to coordinate the real world with these issues. And a lot of times they can run circles around that world if they do it properly, but they're always going to be different from everybody else. So you can't train it out of them, which I think is what a lot of parents, they try to do that early on. Like, we can fix this, we can make them better. It's not a thing that can be fixed or made better. I don't even see it as a negative. I wouldn't be doing what I do today without it. Like I mentioned, we call it a superpower. To me, it's a gift.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said. I have an autistic son, and as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't need to be fixed. No one needs to be fixed. They need to be supported, they need to be understood, they need to be communicated with. And like you said, it's something that is a gift because I see my son, I see so many other people who are autistic or neurodivergent in some other way, and what they are capable of accomplishing if given the right support and the right tools is absolutely amazing and mind-blowing. And that's the right approach. It's the approach that everyone should take, in my opinion. So I completely agree with you. At this point, I'd like to ask you, is there anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't talked about, either about autism in general or about the creative process or about your work, that you would like to mention?
For parents out there, if you think your child might be autistic, start by speaking to their teachers and just kind of bring it up. Because teachers are around our kids a lot more than we are in that particular setting. They may recognize this because they've seen it before. They may not raise their hand. They may not tell the parent right away. But if you bring it up, you can at least get that dialogue going. If your child is on the spectrum in some way, getting that diagnosis early on, like I mentioned, it triggers a lot of things that can be very helpful. So it's good to know that answer one way or the other. And look in my case, like at the light at the end of the tunnel, like I'm a fairly successful guy. I'm doing great navigating this world. I wouldn't trade a single second of my life for anything else. And I feel like I'm blessed that I was born autistic. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today without it. And if you look through history, a lot of very famous people were also diagnosed. So we're not alone in this. It's just a matter of encouraging it. I think shying away from it is probably the only way you can really hurt somebody, making them feel like there's something wrong. Because if you flip that around, if you teach them that it is a superpower, it is something they can use to excel and get ahead, they're going to gravitate towards that. They're going to grab on and they're going to show you some things.
Very wise words, JD. And I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast. You can find it on Apple iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other popular platforms. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like more information on this topic or anything else we've covered on the Autism Resource Podcast, visit us online at autismresourceproject.org/podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future, contact us through the website or comment on any of our social media channels. And be sure to check out our growing website often, since we are continually adding useful information and resources. I want to thank our listeners for spending part of their day with us. This is the Autism Resource Podcast, and I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.